Hello everyone, and today we're gonna talk about the Xbox 360 emulation in 2021. The Xbox 360 emulation, there's quite a lot of good options out there. There's essentially three options similar to the original Xbox. One is two forks of the same emulator. And of course, the best option I would say is once again from Microsoft. Yeah, Microsoft's Xbox 360 emulator, which is available for the Xbox One and Xbox Series consoles, is pretty excellent. Everything that runs on it. Now, as of the recording of this video, the backwards compatibility section of the Xbox Store lists 559 games that are backwards compatible. Now, this does include original Xbox games, but the vast majority of these backwards compatible titles are Xbox 360. I should note that that does come from an Xbox One, so Xbox One games don't count as backwards compatible on an Xbox One. So I looked that up on the Xbox One X store. So it doesn't classify Xbox One games as backwards compatible. That is purely original Xbox and Xbox 360. But again, the majority of these games are Xbox 360. I think there's only about 30 original Xbox games that are backwards compatible in comparison to the over 500, as we know, Xbox Live Arcade and Xbox 360. But again, Xbox Live Arcade was Xbox 360, and like the original Xbox emulator, the Xbox 360 emulator on Xbox One, that's a long thing to say. The Microsoft Xbox 360 emulator works the same way in that the emulator is a bespoke emulator for each game. The footage you're looking at is Red Dead Redemption, which so that emulator for Red Dead Redemption wouldn't run, I don't know, Perfect Dark Zero, for example. It just wouldn't run it because it is tailored to tailored to Red Dead Redemption there. That's the same for every Xbox 360 game that Microsoft make or Microsoft have emulated. It is a bespoke emulator, and you do get Xbox One X enhancements. This is again uh, Red Dead Redemption 1 running on the Xbox One X. So it is enhanced. You do get 4K. 4K resolution runs that. It's still 30 FPS, but they can't really do much with the frame rates. Although they have been changing them on the Xbox One games for the Xbox Series X. So if you have an Xbox Series X as well, you will get the enhanced Xbox One X version of the games, as none of the games have been enhanced for Series X yet, as we say. I imagine they probably will get enhanced in the future. Maybe 60, maybe 120 FPS, who knows? But for now, most of the games don't have enhanced frame rates. If you have an Xbox One S, though, you will just get the basic Xbox One version. And the other disadvantage to the Xbox One S is, of course, that you can't put your discs in because you don't have a disk drive, basically. So that is the other big advantage of this emulator, is you can put your original Xbox 360 disc in, and if it is compatible, if there is an emulated version, again, you will get the download for the emulated version, and the disc will just act as DRM. I like this because it lets us play our Xbox 360 collections. If the game is enhanced for Xbox One X, you will get the enhanced version downloads via Xbox Smart Delivery. So you will get 4K in a lot of games. Not all games have been enhanced, though. It does tell you on the store page which games have been enhanced, because you can buy them digitally or, again, download them. Right, so let's move on to the PC then. And again, you have two options again when it comes to the PC. Both of them are versions of Xenia. Xenia is the Xbox, the experimental Xbox 360 emulator is what it's described as. But it is a pretty decent emulator, and there are two forks when it comes to Xenia. There is Xenia Master and Xenia Canary. Xenia Master tends to be the official version of Xenia. Xenia Canary, though, is an experimental version. Some games which won't work on Xenia may work on Xenia Canary, or if you're having issues on Xenia Master, then some may work on Xenia Canary. We will discuss that further in this video, but for now we're taking a look at Red Dead Redemption once again, running on Xenia Master. I think it runs the same on Xenia Canary. I haven't really tried it. If it works on Xenia Master, there's no real need to try it on Xenia Canary. This is at 720p with VSync disabled. Now, disabling VSync will unlock the frame rate in most games. It will. Some games do turn out to have issues, but you can see Red Dead Redemption, if you're riding out on your own in the wilderness, it will run at over 60 FPS. However, if you do make your way into a town, we made our way into Armadillo, the game's frame rate does take a dip, and it does dip below 30 FPS. So I would argue it is playable. I mean, it's a playable experience. I would always recommend turning VSync off for this. I wouldn't do the resolution scaling because it messes up the cutscenes. That's the other thing about the Xbox 360 emulator, Xenia. Changing the resolution scaling is done in a text file. If you want a comparison between this and RPCSX3, RPCS3 is definitely more user-friendly than Xenia. You have to go in and change the text file to change resolution scaling. There is resolution, it's like draw resolution scale. It should be set to 1 by default, which is usually 720p. So you can only scale it via, it can only do integer scaling. So it can only go 2 by 2 or 3 by 3. So it can only go 720p, and if you set it to 2, that will effectively double the resolution and give you 1440p. 2560 by 1440, and if you set it to 3 by 3, that will give you 4K, which is 3840 by 2160, which is 3 times 720p. So you can't go to 1080p like RPCSX3. Also, again, having to go in and change the text file. Some games don't run well. Some games, if you change the resolution scaling, will have issues, like Gears of War 2. The weapon models just disappear. There's no weapon models there. Some games won't launch at all. Like Wet, for example. Wet just crashes on startup, and that will not launch at all if you don't launch it at native res. So I would just recommend leaving it. Red Dead Redemption that you were looking at was native resolution. I will put the resolutions in the video description. But yeah, most games tend to run better. VSync on, VSync off. Games like Perfect Dark that you're looking at just now has a few graphical issues on an NVIDIA GPU. Can run at 4K. Which is good because it is an N64 game effectively, or a port of an N64 game effectively. That will run, again, 4K 62 FPS, it seems to be capped at with VSync on. If you turn VSync off, it will run at 400 FPS, but as most N64 games of the time, the frame rate is tied to the game speed. So 60 FPS in the Xbox 360 port is 1 time speed. So it will just run, 4 or 5 times the speed if it's running at 400 odd FPS. Runs at 4K at 400 odd FPS if you want to know. And yes, the reason why most people do get this emulator is to play GoldenEye. And yes, GoldenEye does run on this emulator. I've already done a video on GoldenEye. It can run at 4K and 60 FPS. Not really a problem, again, considering it's an N64 or a port of an N64 game. Worth checking out the unreleased version. You can play it, all the single player levels. No multiplayer support there, but it is an unreleased game, so that is pretty nice. We'll move on now to Shadows of the Damned, which runs pretty much the same as it did on the PS3 emulator. We're running at 1440p here with VSync engaged, so we're getting a 30 FPS cap here. But yeah, it runs fine. Not much to say about this that we didn't say in the PS3 emulator. It's an underrated game. Go check it out. And we'll talk about Xenia Canary versus Xenia Master now. With Forza Horizon here, you get to like the first corner in the game and Xenia Master will just crash. However, you can see the game running on Xenia Canary. It runs fine. You can get past that, and it's not really playable. Going into a race was getting 20 FPS. That was really a struggle to get it running. That ice cream van is really annoying. If you can hear the sound in the background, that is the ice cream van. I had to wait a few minutes. I had to pause this and wait a few minutes till it went away. But anyway, yeah, so yeah, Forza Horizon, it does eventually go up to 30 FPS when you get further into the race. Again, the Xbox 360 games, they do, like most modern games on emulators, they do run a texture cache system. So the longer you play it, the better it should perform. You will get stutters the first time you load it up, but as the texture cache builds up, the further you play into the game, the better performance it should get. I'm not a big fan of Forza Horizon, so I didn't play very far into it. We've also got our underrated game for this one. Last time it was Shadows of the Damned. Shadows of the Damned still an underrated game. This time it's going to be Wet, and Wet runs okay. Again, it crashes if you run it at if you try to run it at above 720p resolution, but you can run it with VSync off, and you can get a decent frame rate. The frame rate does fluctuate quite a lot, but having a variable refresh monitor is quite nice. So you can get up to 140 FPS in it. I'm on a 3080 Ti, so again, mileage may vary, but I don't think the 3080 Ti's, we're not going to hit GPU boundaries at 720p on a 3080 Ti. So yeah, it runs pretty good. The frame rate does fluctuate. Wet was an underrated third-person shooter published by Bethesda. Come on, Microsoft, put that on Game Pass. You know, it's a Microsoft IP now. Do a remake or stick it on Game Pass. It was an underrated shooter with an amazing soundtrack, as was Shadows of the Damned as well. It had an amazing soundtrack as well. It was Akira Amiyuka who did the soundtrack for Shadows of the Damned. He did the soundtrack for Silent Hill. Also, it was directed by Suda51 and produced by Shinji Mikami. So yeah, you've got Suda51 craziness, Shinji Mikami's game design, and Akira Amayuka's score. So get Shadows of the Damned and Wet. Wet is a decent game as well. Different developers, different publishers. That bloody ice cream van's back again. Right, so we're just going to muddle through this then. That's really annoying. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. I mean, I'll try and take it out in editing. But anyway, so we've got, the Microsoft exclusive games. We talked about Gears of War. I did a video on that with VSync off and native resolution. Again, you can't upscale the resolution in Gears 2. It runs okay, though, on the second run with VSync engaged. It stuck mostly to 30 FPS. And it was pretty decent, actually. Halo 3, on the other hand, it doesn't run well. Bear in mind that these are unpatched ISO files are running. You can run ISO or you can run XEX files, or the other format. That's like the Xbox executables that the Xbox 360 used. But you can patch them with later versions of the game. So Halo 3 reports 30 FPS, but the frame time is all over the place and it just doesn't feel right to play. So if you want to play Halo 3, yeah, just get the Master Chief Collection. It's available on Steam, so you can buy the individual games on Steam as well in the Master Chief Collection. Just get the native PC version, because again, if your PC is good enough to run an Xbox 360 emulator, it's good enough to run Halo 3 natively on PC. I mean, not much has changed from the 2007 release, the original release for that on... it has a few enhanced graphics options, but they're not as dramatic as, say, the Halo 1 and 2 anniversary. So just play that. It's quite cheap on Steam. You can buy it and buy them individually if you want. So there's no real need to play Halo 3, but it is nice to test the first-party Microsoft game. The other one we tested was Perfect Dark Zero, which really isn't worth playing. Just play the original Perfect Dark, which again, Xbox Live Arcade. I had to play on Xenia Canary, I should point out, for Perfect Dark, because Xenia Master only let us play the trial version. I did try changing the Content ID mask, but didn't work. The game just didn't load on Xenia Master. Loaded fine on Xenia Canary, and we could play the full game on Xenia Canary. So just bear that in mind. I tried Perfect Dark Zero on both Xenia Master and Xenia Canary. Couldn't get past the first level because it just crashes. Again, the sound just stops, and it then just freezes a few seconds later, and then just crashes out there. So there is that there. A few games have issues. Compatibility, it's not too bad, really. Between that and RPCS3, RPCS3, again, we mentioned, is more user friendly. Again, you can configure options on a per game basis because it does that. You can do that in the user interface and have different, because there's so many different options for PS3 games. But so having to save, you can save that for each game. And again, you just right click on it and go to load game with the customized options there. And that's decent. So I would say the 360 emulator, it does work fine for the games. The games that weren't fine are okay, but it does require a bit of expert use, having to go in and edit a text file. There are things that can go wrong, whereas RPCS3 is certainly more user friendly in its approach. Its user interface is a lot better. But yeah, in terms of emulation, they're both pretty good in terms of their compatibility. If you're wondering which version to get, try them both, and whatever version runs the best, you can get it for any of the third-party games. So it really is up to you. But yeah, RPCS3 is probably a better piece of software. Whereas Xenia is a decent emulator, it is experimental, but in terms of usability, just isn't there, isn't the same. Xenia follows quite. No, sorry, RPCS3 is quite like Dolphin in that sense, and even Semu in terms of its usability and its user interface. Xenia is an experimental emulator. It doesn't claim to be anything more than that, so that's fine if you're in if you want to get configure your game to run fine. Then it is a little bit harder on Xenia, but it is certainly a decent emulator. Anyway, that is all for this video. So thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again soon, and goodbye.